Hey everyone, Tactics here, and in this video we're going to be talking about the tank tuning that Blizzard just released last night on March 26th involving a bug fix to Vengeance Demon Hunters, as well as a flat 10% damage reduction to all other tank specs. So this is the post they have here. Recently, players observed that Vengeance Demon Hunters seem to be receiving up to 15% less magic damage than expected. So for those of you unaware, their Demonic Wards ability, which was a 15% flat DR to both physical and magical damage, was actually doubling in the magic damage portion, so they were actually receiving 30% flat magic damage reduction. So basically they found this bug. When specialization is overperforming in raid and dungeon content, we prefer to wait to rein them in until the next major patch. That brings with it all new challenges, different gear, and other changes to shake up balance. Because if we're improving overall balance, mid-tier nerfs can cause entire groups to potentially struggle with raid or dungeon content that could previously complete without issue, and this is especially true for the tank role. And so basically what they've decided to do here, with the fix to Vengeance Demon Hunters, we will increase the Vengeance Demon Hunter passive Demonic Ward to be 5% by 5%. So basically, they're taking away that 15% magic damage reduction that they had, bringing the passive back down to 15% flat, and then they're increasing that by 5%, making it 20% now in physical damage, which is a 5% buff, and 20% now in magic damage, which is technically a 10% nerf. What you'll find is that physical damage is definitely more common, and they do note that here in both Mythic Plus and most raid fights. The damage intake is mostly physical, and so this is actually going to be a net buff for Vengeance, despite it seeming like a nerf if you just look at it at face value. But it is relatively less than other tanks are getting because they're also reducing the overall damage taken by 10% for all of their tanks. So WoW had made a nice little chart here, just plus 10 for all tanks except Vengeance, who is getting plus 5 to physical and minus 10 to magic damage. So what does this really mean for things like Mythic Plus? Well, Vengeance Demon Hunters, again, this 5% physical damage reduction is way more important than the 10% reduction in magic damage taken. So basically what this means is that Vengeance Demon Hunters is actually going to feel tanky come reset when these changes actually go in. It's not uncommon for as much as 60 to 80% of your damage taken over the course of a Mythic Plus dungeon to be physical damage. And so basically, not much is going to change for Vengeance Demon Hunters in that regard. They're going to be taking a little bit less physical damage. But of course, for those higher keys, this is not going to change anything about the kiting meta. So Vengeance Demon Hunters are still going to be one of, if not the single top choice. What it does do is it brings up the tanks directly below Vengeance a little bit to be almost on the same level as them. Not quite, of course, in Guardian, Brewmaster, and Protection Warrior. Now these are all going to be a little bit tankier, which is very nice. The main thing for Guardian, though, I think they're still lacking Snap Threat, which Brewmaster, Prot Warrior, and Vengeance Demon Hunter all have in AoE, and so that's just a little knock to them. But they are the most durable of the four, and are able to face tank things a bit more than them. But Brewmasters maintain a solid ability to kite, and even Prot Warriors, they have that Heroic Leap to get out. If they're Kyrian, they have the Spear to plant the enemies there and root them. And so all three of those, Brewmaster, Prot Warrior, and Vengeance Demon Hunter, are quite good at kiting, and they have good Snap Threat, which I would say puts them a little bit above Guardian Druid, but Guardian is still a solid choice. But overall, yeah, the kiting meta is not going to change the high keys. You're always pushing to the point where your tank can't survive the damage anyways. For mid-level keys, though, you'd expect tanks to pretty much never need to kite, maybe only in very rare situations, which is kind of already the case with current gear levels if you're out gearing the content. But honestly, for the most part, 15s should be perfectly fine for tanks to just kind of face tank and eat everything. The other strength of Vengeance Demon Hunter is, of course, the fact that the DPS meta hasn't changed, right? Boomkins and Fire Mages are still extremely powerful. This is only regarding tanks, and therefore you really want big burst AoE to get that initial snap threat, which Vengeance Demon Hunter has by far the most out of all the tank specs, especially with Kyrian. And the other thing is that magic damage taken increase is very beneficial to those two specs in particular. So it's definitely still looking like Vengeance is going to be the meta spec, at least in 9.0.5, but maybe with 9.1 bringing some shakeups to the rest of the meta, we can see something change for tanks there. In terms of raid stuff, I mean, with current eye level, every tank is in a fine spot in Castellanathra. They can all survive. It's not a big deal. What this could change, maybe not, in 9.1 is a shakeup in tank usage. But the other thing, Blizzard can just fully account for this buff when they're tuning the 9.1 raid. And so it could mean nothing. It could mean something if they don't really account for this. They just let tanks be 10% tankier. But the other thing is you can also expect tuning in 9.1. Maybe for some of these tank specs, maybe for all of them, maybe for none of them. But you can assume that there's going to be some tuning that happens that changes what tank spec you'd want to bring, especially because if you're using your tank as a utility, like one of the monks, warriors, or demon hunter utilities, that could depend on tuning of those respective DPS specs. And so they're still not 100% sure what tank you'll bring to the 9.1 raid, but we'll learn more about that as we see 9.1 actually go on the PTR. If 9.1 were to happen today, I think Brewmaster would be in a much better spot. This 10% physical damage and magic damage taken reduction is really, really big for Brewmaster. It's also really, really big for Protection Paladin, right? Protection Paladin's by far the squishiest tank. It's not even a competition. They are the squishiest tank by far. And so this might actually give them enough durability that to the point where, like, if you actually want that extra tank damage, Prot Paladin's now a viable choice in lower gear levels. Obviously, at higher gear levels, all 6 tanks are perfectly fine. But in lower gear levels, Paladins just tend to be extremely squishy and just kind of fall over. Right, so now maybe this 10% damage reduction is enough for them to actually be brought and bring that insane damage that they do have, as well as the ton of utility that they have. And I think also if you're looking at relative gains here between the tanks, Guardian Druid is already currently the most durable tank, so they're kind of gaining the least here, especially in raids when, I mean, it's really just kind of a, is your tank able to survive the fight or not? And then extra damage reduction on top of that, well, nice, is not always necessary and is not always as meaningful as, say, a damage reduction increase to something like Protection Paladins, right? The Guardian Druids are already insanely durable. They don't really need the 10% damage reduction on top of it to be able to survive all these fights. And that's probably something that's going to be more relevant in 9.1 when you're making your tank selection for next tier, as opposed to a tier that's more than half done already. But it's definitely something to keep an eye out for, as basically, at least at the top end of tanking the highest level guilds, you want to pick the tank that brings the most, and survivability is kind of fallen to the wayside a little bit. You just want a tank that is survivable enough. And then from there, you're looking to gain other things like utility from things like Vengeance, Brewmaster, and Prot Warrior, right? They bring the raid buffs. Maybe there's the actual raid cooldowns in Rallying Cry and AMZ. And then from there, you can look at maybe we want more damage, right? And that's when Prot Paladin and Guardian Druid can start coming into play. And so really, it's going to depend on raid tuning. It's going to depend on the fights themselves. And of course, it's going to depend on general class tuning of not only the tanks, but also their prospective DPS specs, right? Because that does matter when you're bringing tanks for utility. Well, that does wrap up this video, guys. As always, if you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe for more content like it. It really does help. If you want to keep up to date with me, you can follow me on Twitter or check me out on Twitch, both at Tactics. That is all for now, though. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.